Good evening. This meeting of the Attleboro Municipal Council will now come to order. Please join me in a salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Madam Clerk, can you read the notice of the special? I'll suspend the rules after, but
Okay.
thank you.
You're welcome. Date February 4th, 2026. Members of the Municipal Council, Todd Kobus, Council President. Councilors, by authority of Article 2, Section 2-7C of the Attleboro Home Rule Charter, I hereby call a special meeting of the Municipal Council as follows. Date February 10th, 2026. Time is 6:55 p.m. Places council chambers in City Hall, 77 Park Street. The purpose is to introduce new business to approve a joint resolution from the Mayor of Attleboro, the Attleboro Municipal Council, and the Attleboro School Committee to take action within the fiscal year 27 state budget in any time-sensitive matters that may be in front of the Municipal Council. Sincerely, Todd Kobus, President.
Thank you. All right, I will now entertain a motion to suspend the rules.
Second.
Motion is in order. We are suspending the rules because the only thing before us tonight is the new business. We called this special meeting just to introduce this because it's a timely matter. So, any questions on why we're suspending the rules? Hearing none, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, we are now operating under suspended rules. And we will jump straight to new business. And we have one item of new business, and for this, I will recognize Councilor Delicio.
Thank you, President Kobus. I move to refer for study and recommendation to approve a joint resolution from the Mayor of Attleboro to the Attleboro Municipal Council and the Attleboro School Committee, encouraging the Commonwealth to take specific targeted actions within the fiscal 27 state budget to help address Attleboro's immediate school funding needs to maintain level services. The resolution will also reiterate how Chapter 70 formula remains flawed, creating structural budget issues for the city.
Second.
Motion is in order. Councilor Delicio?
Yeah, so what I will say, President Kobus, nice job crafting this. I think this is an important resolution. It's an important opportunity for the administration, the school committee, this honorable body to come together to petition the Commonwealth to take important action from a funding perspective in order to support Attleboro Public Schools, while at the same time encouraging and challenging the Commonwealth to reevaluate Chapter 70 to help address the fundamental education needs of the APS.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments on this? And I believe we'll talk about this more in committee tonight, so this is just the motion to have it heard by committee. Any other questions? Hearing none, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, I will, motion passes, I will assign that to the finance committee. And that concludes the business for tonight. Are there any general announcements? Do we want to talk about the date change for
Sure.
the public hearing? Sorry to put you on the spot. Do you have it?
No, I have it here. It's fine.
Councilor Sawyer?
Yes. On the Zoning and Land Use and Sustainability Committee, there is a change in the date of the public hearing for the zoning petition for 94 County Street LLC to rezone 0 County Street and 92-104 County Street. The original public hearing date was on February 17th, which is now going to change to March 3rd due to an error in the initial filing documents.
Correct. So the public hearing that was scheduled for next week has been moved out 2 weeks, and that was the rezoning petition. It had to do with advertising timelines and some of the data that was presented on the original request from the petitioner. So, in order for us to advertise it, we had to push it out another 2 weeks. That's all. Are there any other general announcements? Hearing none, I move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. We are adjourned at 6:59. And we'll start the committee meetings with Counselor Angelo.
Thank you, President Cobus. I call to order Human Resources and Veterans Committee at 7 PM. Members present, Council Tavares and Council Waterman. First up, we have Mr. Joseph Parent to come up and speak for the Council on Aging to be appointed.
Evening. Joseph Parent, 31 Karen Street, Attleboro. Been in the city for probably about 50 years. I've worked for the fire department in the past, 26 years there. Became an EMT and found that was inadequate and moved on to become one of the first EMTIs in Bristol County with another group of surrounding firefighters. I also found that to be inadequate and became the city's almost first paramedic, coming in number 2. And again, I felt I needed more education, so I went on to school and become a registered nurse, first in the city on the fire department. And spent the next 17 years after retiring working for Procter & Gamble, Gillette in South Boston, on their occupational health department. And also became certified as an occupational health RN. So that's the short of my history, other than any of you really remember the Community Appreciation Breakfast. That was my idea that I started, and it's lasted for 27 years before it died during COVID. So, and that was all to bring the elderly in and bring people in and introduce them to the fire department and see what we all do. And it was a good event. Sorry it lasted only 27 years.
Well, thanks, Mr. Parent. So, obviously, you have a very long history of doing a lot for the city, but yet your main qualification for being on the Council on Aging is that you're old.
Oh, I tried to be a little quirky there.
Yeah, I had a great laugh, and I appreciate you taking the time to do this. And any questions from the council? President, Councilor Delisi.
It's more of a comment, if I may. Joe, glad to see your name come down, glad to see you here. I think you're gonna bring some institutional knowledge, your experiences in the city, and I'm with you. Hopefully the breakfast comes back. That was a fun event for sure,
I
but
doubt that.
never say never.
New
But
new
anyway,
bunch of guys, great guys, they're doing
Oh,
a
yeah.
great job. I mean, the city should be ecstatically lucky that they're with us. They've improved over the years, and it's a great outfit.
well, your impact will be felt immediately, so thank you for your service to the country as well as the city.
Thank you.
Any other, Councilor Waterman?
Joe, I am absolutely delighted that you've selected the Council on Aging. Was that a hard decision? Were you thinking about what committee, what council I'd rather be on, and was it hard, or what made it the Council on
Now,
Aging?
as you know, I'm still a fire commissioner
Correct.
in name, because that's nothing's happened. But I just want to stay busy, and I always want to be on the Council on Aging, because I think it's a very valuable council to get on and learn what's going on over there. And I don't envision making any big improvements, but I just like to be in on what's going to happen over there, especially with the new building in the distant future.
Well, glad to see you there. It's an exciting time to be joining it.
Yep.
It
Thank
is.
you.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none. Thanks, Mr. Parent, appreciate it, and you'll be hearing from us very shortly.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
See you, Joe.
All right, from the docket of February 17th, 2026, entertain a motion to appoint Renee Vashon Danho to fill an unexpired term on the Board of Library Trustees, term to expire February 2028.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Tavares. So, we talked about getting Renee here. She is going to be in Florida until May 1st, and then she's going to come in and she's going to be in front of the council. Everybody should have seen her resume and see her qualifications there. We also talked about possibly having her on Zoom, and then the decision was made to let's just bring her in person when she comes in here. And I did question with the mayor on if, because a lot of stuff happens during the off-season, during the winter times, on the library board of trustees, and she is gonna be zooming in, because they need that help in there, because someone had just resigned. So they need Renee in there to be able to continue on doing the things through the winter time, and she will be zooming in from Florida. And so, any questions, comments, or concerns? All right, seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion passes 3-0. From the docket of February 17, 2026, entertain a motion to appoint Joseph Parent to fill an expired term on the Council on Aging, term to expire February 2030.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Tavares. So obviously, we just heard from Joe. You know, aside from him being old, kidding, of course, he comes with, has done a lot for the city, in addition to being a veteran of the Army aviation as well. So obviously, we thank Joe for everything that he's done over the years. It's been a great deal, and I think it's going to be a great appointment for the Council on Aging. Any questions, comments, concerns? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion passes 3-0. For the docket of December 16, 2026, entertain a motion to appropriate $100,000 from account 1000-359-000, undesignated fund balance free cash, general government, to account 11241-000-530-150, citywide special event.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Tavares. So basically, it's the 250th year of our wonderful country, and it's going to be a big celebration. And from what I understand, it's going to span of about 3 days. So basically, we have a lot of people part of a group that is getting donations and stuff, but you have to have some money to get these appointments done ahead of time, or you're just going to lose them. You take a chance. And we heard on the public hearing, we heard from everybody that discussed this and how important it is to have that ahead of time. And I think there was a little bit about, possibly some, funding shortage, for the city and stuff. And I think that is not as bad as originally anticipated. So, and this is going to be a great deal to get this started and have this 3-day event for the city and the celebration for the family and the kids, and I'm going to support it, and hopefully others will. Any questions, comments, concerns? Councilor Tavares.
So I agree with you. I'm in full support of this. I think being able to celebrate the history of our city, our country, is important. So I think it makes sense to spend a few extra bucks to do that. But not only that, but as you mentioned, to be able to prepare this far in advance, right? Being able to sign purchase orders and things like that, not be scrambling at the last minute, not knowing whether there's funds available or not that have been raised. But I think that also opens up the question to, planning for this in the future, right? We talk about, planning as a city, and for some things we haven't done that well, and I think we've got an opportunity to do that here. And so I think really thinking through, I've been thinking about, various ideas to, maybe, partner with, a nonprofit group, or even create one with some folks here in the city to be able to raise funds that, maybe could almost operate as sort of a trust, right? So, so that, recurring returns inside of that trust can fund, annual fireworks or just other special events across the city. So I think that's something to think about here, and think beyond 2026 as well. So
You got some great ideas, so I appreciate that very much, and I think it's well worth looking into.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councilor Waterman.
Well, I echo Councilor Tavares' feelings about settling it now. We're not going to go through the period of anxiety that has occurred in the past. And we can begin to look at the programming, rather than just the money.
Yeah.
And I know a certain group down at the Council on Aging that might want to do patriotic music.
Oh,
So,
nice.
there's a lot of ideas that are going to come out.
Great, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Councilor Holmes?
I completely agree with what you had mentioned, and Councilor Tavares. I think that when we look at the timeline, the year that we had the Laser Light Show, and then the year that there was great funding efforts, it still was falling. It's just too much, like they had mentioned when they tried to do bingo and everything. So this will get them a little bit of a jump start and prepare for potentially partnering with someone. And I'm even thinking, like, I don't know if the community block grant, if there's some way to kind of find other sources of funding, but this is something that's important. And when you think about Attleboro, we are a city, so we would be the ones that Norton, Rehoboth, all those places kind of come here to enjoy this. So I think it's something that we can offer not only to us, but surrounding communities. It's important.
Thank you. President Cobus.
Thank you. Do we understand what the actual cost is? And do we have sort of a cost breakdown for where this 100,000?
That was,
So I didn't see anything in the backup, sorry.
it was, I think Mason had spoken of that when he was here at the public hearing, or was it you or the mayor? Maybe it was the mayor, but there was some discussion of some numbers, and I know there was definitely some discussion, some numbers. I don't know if I have that on me, but they had laid it all out. Sorry. Yeah.
I don't think this needs to slow it down for, voting it out of committee, but it would be useful to understand what that is and
Sure.
understand just because it's such a tough budget year, I don't know if we could reduce it a little bit or anything like that, or, I think the fireworks are incredibly important, and I don't wanna block that, but I do question if we can reduce the number a little bit.
Vice President Dolan?
I have those numbers, it's 70,000 for everything.
And that would be this year, which would be unlike, future years.
Correct.
The
total's 70,000.
Sorry, old habits.
Sorry.
Councilor Delacio.
So the cost on the event is roughly 27,000, I believe, 27 to 30. A lot of it is just everything else. You get your vendors, you got contractual obligations such as details, cleanup, things of the like. The 100,000, I don't think anyone loves spending money, but I think this opportunity comes literally once every 250 years. But it would give us an opportunity to pay for this year while getting a head start on next year and going forward, which is the way it used to be done. So we would collect, current year for the next year. So I think that helps us get back into that cadence a little.
Thank you, Councilor Delacio. Vice President Dolan?
Yeah, the 70,000 includes, fireworks, corporate, small I'm reading the wrong one. The pyrotechnics is 27,000. And then you have the porta potties, police detail, fire detail, labor details for recreation, street cleaning, flyers, magician, face painting, bubbles, DJ, which comes to 7839.
All right. Any other questions, comments, concerns? All right. Seeing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 3-0. That's all for Human Resources and Veterans Committee. A call for an adjournment at 7:13.
Second.
Thank you, Council Tavares. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion passes 3-0. We're adjourned.
I'd like to call Finance Committee at 7:13. We have 3 pieces of business on the docket, but prior to that, I've invited Mason to come down and talk to us a little bit about where we're at with the budget, what to expect heading into this upcoming budget season. One thing I was thinking about, and I talked to Mason briefly earlier tonight, is if there are questions, and questions, burning questions tonight, let's certainly ask them, but if there are questions, because this is a lot to go through, that would be helpful for you to get answers to that you can drop back to. We talked about kind of doing a Q&A. So if there's questions that you have after this or during this, that maybe you don't want to ask, you don't know how to ask, whatever, send it through Jen to me. Mason and I will work on putting together a document that we all have. We can put it on the SharePoint site. So we have access to it as we head into the budget season. But Mason, welcome. Thank you for coming down.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair Delacio. Appreciate the invitation to come down. I'm going to try not to wear out my welcome, as you're going to be seeing a lot of me over the next few months. This is the season, so we'll be getting used to spending a bunch of long nights together, I'm sure. So tonight I just wanted to, as Chair Delacio said, just go over some status updates of where we're at the budget. Laid out a lot of information in those Q2 budget reports that came down on the last communication, so hopefully that answers all your questions, but I'll hit a little bit of the high level just for, if there's any follow-up, and then for the public at home. And really wanted to shift gears and focus on FY27. So somewhat of an expansion of the conversation at the joint meeting between the school committee and the council last week. Some follow-up to that. And just some status updates on where we're at with reserves and just some of the thinking and the path ahead. Tonight, the focus is on general government. So Chair DeLisio had mentioned potentially in a couple weeks from now, come down and talk about water and wastewater. So that's obviously a significant undertaking as well. So we want to devote enough time to sort of both of those, especially when we're talking about the historic water and wastewater rate increases that we've seen, and a lot of the new capital expenditures that we have going on. So just start with high level. Hopefully everyone can see this, but some of these charts are the backup documents from last week. I just wanted to give high level expenditure review through the second quarter, which is December, and just flag some of the anticipated funding needs that you would have seen in the memo, but just to hit them here, just to go through some of those with the council. So as you know, we hired a new council admin. We had a little bit longer of a training cycle and a little bit longer of a time with our previous council admin. So we'll be a little bit short on the salary and wage line for the council budget. So we'll have to true that up over the next couple months. It will be a small expense, but just something to be aware of, because you'll see a request come down at some point in the next couple months. Citywide, we did have some unanticipated expenditures related to some emergencies in the last few months, and one of those professional service accounts is where we kind of had to go to resolve some of those immediate circumstances. So we are predicting a shortfall, and that's one of our larger professional service accounts. So we should be seeing some funding requests come down in the next couple months there, likely this next communication or the communication afterwards. In the treasurer's office, this is a typical item every year related to med tax. So this is a payroll tax, and it's 1.45% of all payroll. So every year we budget up front based on the budgeted salary and wages and all the payroll costs. And as there's additional overtime or other costs that come in through the budget, we end up needing a little bit more throughout the year. The calculation we have done in the last couple of years has served us better than historically, where we really underfunded that line. So we think it's going to be a small request, but it's just something to keep an eye on. Don't have a good number on that quite yet. Collector, as you know, there's this line was insufficient for this year, so there will likely be some postage increase at some point in the next few months. Human resources. So human resources is where our health insurance budget is. So one of the big driving factors for our budget challenges is health insurance. Medics are those retiree plans, those Medicare supplement plans that we offer, and those are on a calendar year basis rather than a fiscal year basis. So on January 1, those had a 21% increase. I think we heard some of that already in the last couple months, but budgeted was only about a 7.5% mid-year increase. So we do have some projected shortfall there that we'll likely have to true up, and that number has a significant impact on next year's budget as well. Police, we have some additional personnel costs. A number of these are related to hirings and some of the additional incentives for college degrees, where it drives up some of the other costs, where upfront we budget based on the personnel that we know we have and try to budget for vacancies that we intend to fill. As that situation becomes clearer throughout the year, those costs end up coming in at a different number. This year a little bit higher in some of these categories. Fire, similar situation for a number of these between the college credits, certification differential, but we also have a number of other overtime issues related to some of the emergencies that have gone on in the city. So definitely some unanticipated emergency response costs for both police and fire. And dispatch, when we had our cyber incident, there was a significant overtime cost there. So we are dealing with some of that. A lot of these requests actually that you see up here, a number of them already come before you, a number have already been approved, but there's still some other outstanding items related to overtime, just some expectation over the next few months. The vehicle maintenance and repairs, you already kind of heard the story on that and have already acted on that. Protective inspection, there's an item before the council currently, just related to some current staffing challenges we have right now, so just filling for some leaves. So that's an item already before you. That's a relatively de minimis amount. And then animal control already had a couple of overtime issues related to vacancies. So currently using funding within the budget, created from those vacancies, but we don't know where that will go depending on the hiring cycle, so just something to keep an eye on. But high level, those are the things that, at least in the next few months, that we expect there could be, some challenges there if we don't come down for additional funding, some of which have already been addressed. Our revenues are performing solidly and as expected through Q2. Couple ones we just wanted to highlight. The room revenue, so this is a local receipt. Again, we really only have like one hotel motel in the city, but we only have, these are the room taxes, the hotel surcharge. This is, the trend's coming off a little bit from the last couple of years, so we've been systematically increasing this revenue over the last few years, but we're starting to see kind of that plateau, so we don't expect to have, additional capacity into next year's budget. We review these revenues every year. We do sort of 5-year, 10-year look back and evaluate, do trend analysis and look at where we can grow those local receipts. Don't really think we have much room to go there. We've kind of plateaued. Cannabis is interesting. We suddenly kind of had a rebound this year compared to the last few years. So the last couple of years, there was the change in Rhode Island offering recreational cannabis, and that really, we took a pretty big cut to our cannabis revenues when that happened. It seems that those have rebounded significantly this year. So we'd accounted for that in the last couple of years, but kind of seen a rebound there. So we probably have some room to go back up on that as a local receipt. So just something to track closely over the next few months. Penalties and interest is a very difficult one. This is largely tied to economic conditions and interest rates. It's very hard to predict. It's very cyclical. Right now, we have a much higher than anticipated penalty and interest revenue, and this is likely due to market conditions. It usually trends up when unemployment rises or underemployment rises. When there's sort of difficult economic conditions, that's usually when you see an increase in those revenues, and we also still have a heightened interest rate environment. So that's one of those that can fluctuate significantly year to year, so we're looking at that closely to see where that puts us for next year. Other charges for services, just wanted to touch on ambulance fees really quick. As the council knows, we made a change to sort of automatically incrementally increase the ambulance fees tied to the Medicare increases, so that it's less of a challenge going forward. We don't have to evaluate every year. We're basically tying it to an outside source there. One of the things we are looking to do as the city is change the contribution where those revenues are appropriated. So currently, 60% of the revenue goes to the general fund, 40% goes to the revolving fund. The revolving fund, which is intended to manage ambulance expenses and EMS-related expenses. As the costs of maintenance and everything else have continued to rise, that revenue split's been rather insufficient for the fire department and its operations. So, the chief and I have been working on, and as well as changing the rate structure, has been working on a solution to kind of incrementally change this shift to get to a 50-50 long term. So we're expecting to submit a proposal in the next couple weeks here. So we're still working on that. But what our expectation is to try to propose shifting it 2% per year. So as the revenues kind of project to increase 2% a year, the revolving fund will sort of capture that increased revenue while the general fund will remain stable. So just wanted to flag that, and that's something that you should see before you pretty soon. And the chief will give more information on why that's important and why it's necessary. Rentals. A couple of our primary rental incomes are related to the building right next door. The RMV obviously has its location there, and the Registry of Deeds has its location there. We are anticipating that both of those are going to be leaving that building in the next year. So with that, that's a significant portion of that rental revenue, so we're expecting a pretty significant fall off there. On the grand scheme of things, it's not large, but we do expect a rollback in that revenue. Building permits is starting to trend down significantly off some of the historic highs, so we're watching that really closely. It's a little bit behind where we would have anticipated through this point, which can be indicative of broader market conditions, but we are kind of coming off those highs we had a couple years ago. Fines and forfeits, kind of still continuing to trend significantly higher than anticipated. We've had larger collection related to some of the ticketing efforts with the police department and the traffic enforcement. So that's continued to trend up. So we'll likely have some room to grow there in terms of our budget, and we expect to recognize that into next year. Investment income continues to be way higher than budgeted, but is trending down from the highs. So we have come down significantly from last year and the year prior. We're still in a heightened rate environment, but those rates are sort of settling out. We've seen a number of rate cuts in the last calendar year, and so we're starting to see the impacts of that and the returns that we can get on our liquidity. So while we do anticipate, continuing to get a little bit more than what's currently budgeted, and we have a little bit of room to grow there, we're kind of coming back down to the historical norms. So we're not going to be, overly dramatic in how we respond to that and ultimately create other fiscal challenges later on. And then just to touch on Medicaid reimbursement, it's on track as we would expected. We only have the first quarter at this point. The major portion of Medicaid reimbursement is right at June 30th, so it makes it really hard to kind of predict where things are going. But this has been heightened in the last few years, and just as a reminder that the school gets a 50% share of that revenue, so we always recognize that through a contribution from free cash because it comes in at the end of the year.
So Mason, that's an important point, right? You're talking about the Medicare reimbursement only through the first quarter. We should be at 50% of where we're at, right? So you look at these and you look at vehicle excise tax, for instance. Well, it doesn't run on our schedule, it runs on their schedule, right? So I think that's just an important thing to look at when we're looking at some of these numbers and where we are year to date. That it's not necessarily a bad thing that when you look at vehicle excise, that it's 17%. That's gonna hit in the next several weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. At this time of the year, the typical is between 14 to 16. So we're right where we would expect. The major commitments don't come in until, I believe, March. So that's really, all that revenue is sort of committed and logged March and beyond in the fiscal year. So that's pretty typical. So, and some of that you'll kind of see in the backup memo, but that is an important point, some of these are due to timing. So did want to give an update as of expenditures today, because obviously the big topic is snow and ice. I think it's fair to say we're in a very heavy snow and ice season. We haven't seen one like this in a number of years, and I think the numbers kind of show that out. So high level, as of today, we've expended just over $427,000 towards snow and ice removal in this fiscal year. And we have encumbered under contracts, we have just over $1 million. Now, just to not scare you with the encumbered amount, those are encumbered, expecting that we'll continue to need snow plowing services. It doesn't necessarily mean that those are committed for yet, but they're funds that are available in that account through existing purchase orders. What I will say is at this time last year, this number was pretty much half of this. So through January of last year, we had spent $196,000 on snow and ice removal, which still had a couple storms there. And we had $650,000 contracted for at the time. By the end of the year, we spent just under $850,000. So it's about a 50% clip from last year to this year. So, while those numbers are not final there, we're kind of continuing down a track that's, pretty heavy winter. I think we all know there's more coming in tonight. So I have to take off my skier hat, because I'm a snow person, I love skiing, but I gotta take that off and put my budget hat on, and unfortunately it's not a good thing. So this is one of the things, when we talked about initially in the free cash presentation that, we were basically doing an internal holdback of about $1 million, and that's why we do this. We basically say, hey, we're not gonna spend that because we need that available to cover the snow deficit, and this is exactly why. And that may not even be enough this year if things continue on this trend. If we have another significant, 10+ inch storm, that's really where the bulk of it comes, because that's a multiple day operation, and you're picking up the pieces. And now we're in a point in the year where it's all built up. We're not having real melt off, so it just sort of compounds. But just wanted to give an update that is as of today. So just give a quick free cash update. There's only one item that's pending before you. It was actually just discussed in committee. But this is where we stand today in terms of what's been requested for free cash use. So, there's sort of a difference between what we'd say is the balance available for appropriation and what I might call the working balance. So, we started the year with $9.9 million in free cash, and that was certified in October, and really the first uses of it were in November. And we're sitting with $8.6 million, just north of that, but we do have a couple items that should be coming down here in the next couple weeks that are based on existing commitments and historical practice to provide the net school spending surplus back to the schools. So that's about $600,000 there. And then we just talked about the Medicaid sharing Reimbursement sharing, the school takes gets 50% of that through an agreement as well. So
Mason,
nice to have, yeah, go ahead.
Going forward, are you able to get maybe a bi-weekly or weekly update, monthly, of where we're at? Just a memo to Jen that she can get out to the councilors, so we just have an understanding of where we're at with the free cash.
Yeah,
'Cause
absolutely.
we see a lot of the appropriation, not even say with the reserve fund for transfer too. We see these numbers come down and it's kind of like, all right, well, what do we have left in there? How is this going to impact that? So I know in the past we've had something similar.
Yep.
So I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah, so I think a good way to do it with some of our capabilities with Microsoft 365 is we'll create a shared spreadsheet where you can see a live version.
Great.
And then, I'll continue to put budget updates on the budget website on the city, trying to overhaul that a little bit and make sure these updates go on there, and I can do a monthly update.
Thank you.
And then also, sped stabilization is highlighted there. As you know, there's another request for an additional $400,000 from the school department for special education related transportation. So that would bring us up to an $800,000 authorization for the year. So we do need to think about, how do we want to attack this? So kind of keeping an internal holdback. We're not necessarily holding back right now for stabilization and some other reserves, but I think we do really need to visit sped stabilization because, they're on a track right now to spend over half of what was in the stabilization balance to start the year, which means they have less than a year of runway if we continue down this path. So, while funds are available, it's probably it would be a strong recommendation to at least make some level of contribution this year to backfill for some of the expenses they're dealing with.
And Mason, that's an unfunded mandate, the transportation, and it's a moving target every year. I think there's probably value in taking a look, because this is the second stabilization account in a few weeks that we've looked at increasing. Maybe we just can talk about that at budget time too. Are there gonna be others that you look at that we might have to increase that expenditure level on as well?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And then, similar to the memo we sent down previously related to, or back in the Q1 update, or the free cash update, is just, we are internally holding back some money for what we're expecting to be a significant budget deficit this year. So making sure we have a place to go without going into stabilization. Councilor Dolan, you had brought up the point, does it make more sense to contribute and pull from it? Or does it make more sense to just use free cash rather than use stabilization? And this was a question you asked last time, and the answer is it makes more sense to not contribute to stabilization this year, and instead, if we do need a one-time revenue source, use free cash towards the budget rather than stabilization. Just looks better from a ratings perspective. It's ultimately the same pot of money, but it is it's a little bit easier to explain rather than drawing down the stabilization. So that puts us at a working balance of just under 3.7 million. There's some other items that we have to deal with, but there's continue to be capital expenditures and other items that will come in the next few months, and consistent with what was already presented in the last update. So just some other operational reserves. Reserve fund for capital. So we've almost exhausted this fund this year between 3 capital items. So we do have about 20,000 remaining that can be utilized for a small scale capital expense or partial funding for a larger capital expense. So we will, attempt to exhaust that before the end of the year. This is a, one time, this is an annual budgeted amount, so it's not something that carries forward. And then just our operating reserve, our citywide reserve fund for transfer, we are at about 266,000. You'll remember that we had the additional new growth that was added back in October. So that originally it was budgeted for 320,000. That added an additional 240. So ultimately the working balance there was about 560,000. We've exhausted a little less than half of that. So or a little more than half of that. Apologize. So what our goal here with with this reserve is usually to use it for recurring costs or small expenditures. If things are one-time costs, that's where we'd go to free cash, but it's better to anything that's going to be recurring, because this is coming from recurring revenues in the budget. The preference is to use the reserve fund. Just a quick update on some of our stabilization counts. So this special education stabilization number, that is a good number, but it does not include the additional 400,000 authorization. So as soon as that's authorized, contracts will be entered, and that number will drop down to 677,000. So just when we talk about, kind of where we started and where we are now, it's, if all that money is exhausted, they don't anticipate to use the full 800,000, but they expect at least in excess of 600, then we'll be under $1 million for the first time in a few years. And then these other stabilization accounts, the capital stabilization, it does retain its interest. So, we made $2 million in contributions a couple years ago, or in FY24, and so it's continued to accrue interest, and that stays within that fund available for capital expenditures in the future to offset debt costs. The stabilization, so based on our projected budget for next year, our current balance is about 5.8 to 5.95%. So obviously, as our budget grows, the percentage goes down if we don't contribute to it. We set a target to get to 6% last year, and we'd like to long-term get to 10%. That's unrealistic during these times, but we'd like to at least hold steady and not go backwards. Based on where we expect the budget to be, this will be back under 6%.
Bless you.
All right, so now for the fun topic. So budget discussion. I want to give you a high-level overview of what our revenues are projecting to be based on the state aid numbers that you heard significant discussion at the joint meeting last week. Now that we have the governor's proposed budget, we have some initial state aid numbers. This will go through the state legislature, so these numbers will change. The actual budget we propose will be with whatever the most updated numbers are available at the time, and then we always true it up with the final signed budget in the fall. So for state aid, we're looking at $71,817,582. That's primarily Chapter 70. There's the offsets. Those are related to libraries. The indirect transfer, this is an estimate based on our estimated budget for next year. So unfortunately, we weren't able to actually complete an indirect cost study in time for this year, which we had intended to do for this budget, just given the cyber incident and some other issues that we just weren't able to get to that, which we wanted to for this year. So we're likely going to be utilizing the same indirect cost study for one additional year and try to actually get that study started before July 1st using the money that's already available in the budget. Because even once you do the study, it takes time. There's time for internal review. It involves interviews with all the departments, looking at workload and sort of the indirect cost to the other departments. So it is a long process, and just because we were supposed to start that right around when the cyber incident happened, and so unfortunately that just didn't happen this year. So we would be using the same percentages. Our local receipts, that represents about a 3.5% increase over this year based on some early estimates. Property tax. We can go through this figure really quickly. So this is based on our 2.5% increase over on previous year limit, as well as an early estimate for new growth provided by the chief assessor. This is consistent with right around the number we had been carrying in our financial forecast, so it's good to see that we're kind of on the same page related to new growth. And then that's just sort of the breakdown by class. This is a little bit higher than the original new growth estimate in last year's budget. So that's broken down below. In total, currently the preliminary estimate is just under $2,199,886,000. That is approximately a 3.5% increase in revenue from last year, from FY26 to FY27. This number will change, but we will be in that 3.5% ballpark. There won't be it won't be significant change. So just want to talk about state aid high level. So net state aid is the state aid minus the state and county assessments. So we have obligations to state and county charges that effectively come as a credit against our state aid. So the actual receipt that comes into the city for state aid is less the charges. So that's the way we think about this. The governor's budget proposes a 3.15% increase from FY26 to FY27 for Attleboro. That's just under 1.9 million in state aid increase, which is only 2.68% increase in state aid, but the charges are expected to go down. I will say, last year in the governor's proposal, the charges we had a significant decrease in the charges and actually ticked up a little bit later throughout the budget process. So we hope that's not the case here, because I don't expect the state aid to get better, but I'm concerned that the charges could get worse. But we expect to be in around the 3% ballpark. So just to compare to the last few years, that would be the lowest year since FY22, FY21. So I want to talk about net school spending, expansion from your meeting last week. So the preliminary net school spending number, this number realistically won't really change, but this is the DESI net school spending number. It's an increase of 3.8 million, about 3.47%, up to $113,893,945. On the Chapter 70, like the net school spending is broken down to two items. It's Chapter 70, which is the state portion, and the local contribution, which is the city portion. The state portion, so the actual part that the state is covering of that increase is an increase of 1.43 million, about up 2.31%. The city's required contribution is going up 4.95%, 2,389,000. So, you can see that, the cost of education is rising, and the state has the expectation that the city will contribute more towards that rising cost. And obviously, you just saw the projected revenue increase of 3.5%, whereas the local contribution itself is an increase of nearly 5%. So then just to discuss expenditures before we kick into a more nuanced discussion around education spending. This is an approximate 4.6% increase in our budget. A lot of that's driven by health insurance. So, without the health insurance problem, we'd be a lot closer to that 3.5% increase in our revenue. Health insurance is a big factor here. We do believe our budget can sustainably rise at about 3.5% because we typically have an increase in revenue between 3 and 4%. So there's a lot of factors in our budget that we think are sustainable, but there's a few key factors that are just currently not sustainable. One number to note here is the overlay for abatements. We're entering into a full reevaluation year. So usually we carry about a 1% overlay, 1% of the overall tax levy. This year, with it being a full reevaluation year, the recommendation is a 1.1%. So that number is a little bit higher than you would typically see. It would be closer to just over 1 million. So there's a little bit additional revenue that needs to be allocated towards that overlay account. So I hope you can see this. I know it's a little bit hard. I want to talk about net school spending versus required education budget. So these are numbers that I've already I was invited before the school finance subcommittee last week, and we actually went through this in detail so that they could get an idea of, okay, we understand the state's number, but what does that mean for the city, so that they have an idea for planning purposes. And so we're able to kind of get into a little bit of the weeds here on the calculation. Let's see if this laser pointer works. That's not useful. All right. So there's a number of factors that go into net school spending, but then actually result in the required education budget. Those two numbers are actually different. So what the city is required to contribute towards education is different than what the net school spending number is. That's because there's a number of credits and there's a number of additions that go into education costs. The credits are enrollment driven. They're enrollment and they're state driven. So there's what's called the per pupil administrative costs, which is basically what the state says is the school or the city or the town's administrative costs to offer education. So outside of the actual, the schools and the school administration, what is the outside city cost on a per pupil basis? So last year that number was $152.77 per student. That's the state's number. That's an actual number that they use. And right now we're carrying a preliminary estimate of $156.83. That's about a 2.6% increase. That's the historical 10-year average, excluding a couple of really high outliers. Last year, we had projected a 2.4%, which was the historical 10-year average. It ended up being 5.5%. But just to give you some perspective, even with that number coming in way higher, that only moved the needle about 23,000. So it's not a significant change just because it's on a per pupil basis. But that is sort of a credit that the state counts towards the city's contribution to net school spending. So what happens is we start with the required net school spending and we back out some of these credits. So down below, you'll see required net school spending calculation. That's the two numbers you saw in the previous chart. That's the local contribution, and that's the Chapter 70 aid. So that's where you get the $113.89 million. Up above are what's called allowable city expenses. These are really where the credits come into play. So just to break it down, we have the administrative costs, which is in line C, school security, which is related to the school resource officer and the Cops in Schools program. So That is a consistent average we've carried over the last few years for the cost of an officer for the schools, but there is discussions right now between the school and the city of the schools are looking for potentially a second officer in the schools, and based on our existing staffing, we would have to increase the number of police patrolmen we have in the city. So if that were the case, this number would effectively double as a credit because we would have to hire a whole nother officer. Then you have the sending tuition for school choice and the charter school sending tuition. These are just from the governor's budget. These are cherry sheet numbers. So the reason these basically count as a credit is because you can think about it as the state sends us Chapter 70 money, but they back off that number from what they send us. So they're basically giving us credit for it towards net school spending because they're not sending it to us, if that makes sense. So our actual Chapter 70 that comes in is reduced by the sending tuition. So they basically assume that as a cost. The big non-net school spending expense that's driving costs is pupil transportation. So pupil transportation is not net school spending eligible. So everything above is net school spending credits, and then the transportation is non-net school spending. So that is additional money that the city has to provide outside of the net school spending budget to support the Attleboro Public Schools. So the biggest cost driver, I think, besides health insurance and some other things in our budget, has really been the transportation costs. I mean, you've heard about it with special education as well. And what the result of that is the credits you can see since FY20 have decreased from 5.6 million down to 4.4 million. The transportation costs, adversely, have increased from just under 4 million to 6.2 million. So it used to be that, and there was always a discussion of, there was frustration around like the city takes these credits, and ultimately our net school spending number is actually higher or lower than the amount, or higher than the amount they give us. And then on the back end, they get the credits. But the reality is that's sort of changed over time to where, the credits have decreased so much because, people are staying here. We're not sending people away as much. They're staying. If you build it, they will come. And our transportation costs have ballooned. So the contracts are supposed to increase by 5.8% next year, and that's the last year of the transportation contracts. So those will have to go out for another round of bidding as a public bid process, and we really have no idea where that's going to go. When we talk about the unified message between the council and school committee, if they don't want to, if the fear is don't focus on Chapter 70 and don't open up the whole formula, the focus should really be transportation. This is the biggest factor that's driving, the costs for education in Attleboro and why the city is struggling to be able to keep pace with net school spending, and we're going to continue to fall further and further behind. So to break this down simply, you'll kind of see at the bottom sort of the gap between the required budget and net school spending. It used to be that the credits outweighed the cost of transportation. We've done a full 180, and where it used to be it outweighed by over $1 million, it's now in reverse by over $2 million. So that's why you see, while you heard the net school spending number at the joint committee, the actual budget that the city is required to give to the Attleboro Public Schools is actually $116 million. So that is the minimum required budget we would have to provide to the schools to account for transportation and net school spending. So just to give, high level, this is just kind of a summary again, how the credits and the additions sort of impact and what the changes sort of to the required city contribution each year. So since FY23, it's sort of increased by almost $750,000 per year of additional funds that we have to give over the last year additional funds, if that makes sense. So it's sort of a compounding effect. That's how we gotten to the point where the transportation exceed the credits by $2.2 million. The other big factor is actually in the formula itself. You've heard me talk about this before, but the local contribution is a challenge for us the way it's actually embedded into the formula. So to put it as simply as possible, the way the state calculates our required local contribution to net school spending is they take last year's contribution, they multiply it by 1 plus our revenue growth. So if our revenue growth is 4%, they multiply it by 1.04. They basically add 4% and say, okay, that is your preliminary required local contribution. But that's just the preliminary. So they say, it kind of makes sense, right? They're saying your revenues grew by this much, so similarly, you should carve out the same amount towards education. And for us, that kind of makes sense when education's half our budget. It's like, okay, we grow by 4%, make sure they get an equivalent share of that 4%. But then the formula, this is where the formula really breaks down and where Attleboro gets caught in a difficult cycle. The state sets a target percentage share. And after they get to that preliminary number, they evaluate, okay, how does that compare to our target? So they kind of set an arbitrary target, to be honest with you. I can't find out why the target is set at the percentage it is. I honestly think it's because they work backwards. They say, hey, we have this much money to provide to the school systems across the Commonwealth. So, to work backwards from that, we have to establish a target share that meets that, to be honest with you. That's how I think it works. But what's happened is that target share has been between like 47 and 50%. And for a number of years, we were within 1%, really within 0.5% of that target. And so if you're within that small of a percentage, which is really a de minimis amount, you took your revenue growth, they said, okay, your revenue grew by that much, that's how much your local contribution needs to grow. But if you fall between 2.5% to 7.5% away from that target, they say, okay, we took your revenue growth, we added it, but now you're too far away from our target, so we want you to pay 1% more. So they said that our revenues grew by 4%, but they want us to pay 5% more. So that's where the challenge comes for the city and why we get caught in sort of a cycle for the city and the school department is that, the state is sort of arbitrarily saying, you're too far away from our target, we don't have enough state aid to give out to the state, so we need you to pay more. So that coupled with the transportation is the biggest challenge for the city and why we're chasing a moving target related to net school spending. So it's not a problem that the schools created, definitely not a problem the schools created, definitely not a problem the city created, but we're facing a moving target that we're going to fall further and further behind because we're always starting from behind. They've said your revenues grow by this percentage, but they want us to pay in excess of that. So that's the biggest challenge, and we're already battling the rising cost of transportation. So that, I think, is the fundamental flaw in the formula, if I had to point to one thing. So if the state is going to reopen the Chapter 70 formula, that is what I think as a city we should focus on. And then outside the formula, I think we should focus on transportation. But just to simplify what that means is the bottom line, I think, is the most helpful. This is the cost that, since FY 2020, we've been required to provide in excess of our actual revenue growth to meet the minimum obligation for required education spend. And the reason I show this is because one of the things that I think the school administration did a really good job of was kind of saying how, talking about the historical trend. And while we've largely stayed consistent with the rest of the state, we're continuing to get closer and closer to that net school spending number. And the biggest fall off was starting in FY23. And if you just kind of bear it out from above, you see that that's when the credits really transitioned, where the credits were more than the transportation. And that's when we really started to get hit for the additional 1%. So what happened was we went from almost 4% above net school spending to where we're barely able to meet net school spending. And that's going to continue to compound. Like, we don't really have a pathway for it to get better without cutting other services in the city. So, and it makes sense. Like, based on the way the state is structuring it, they're saying your revenue grew by this percent. We want you to pay an additional 1% above. So the only way to get that is to pull it from a one-time revenue source or magically come up with new revenue or cut expenses somewhere else. So in order to meet that obligation, which we will continue to do, and we need to, we're falling further and further behind in education, but the only way to meet that obligation is to cut elsewhere. So the result is that, we've continued to kind of trim the fat as much as we could in terms of, some of like maybe efficiencies in other areas, but from the last budget, we already went to the place where we put on sort of hiring freezes. We didn't fill vacant positions. We've taken those actions over the last few years to minimize this impact, but we're kind of at that breaking point. So high level, that's just what I wanted to give. So when we talk about the shared message, I think we focus on transportation as really the biggest challenge for us and how we can, hopefully breed more competition in that area and drive some of those costs down. And then if we do open the formula, focusing on, this arbitrary additional percentage that the state assigns us to and basically says pay more than you actually have. That's the biggest challenge we face in terms of that side of things. And we're going to fall, unfortunately, we're going to fall further and further behind each year. We don't really, because of the way this is sort of built into the system, we don't have a pathway to improve there. high level, just wanted to give an outline of the tentative budget process. So tonight was just sort of the early presentation on the general government budget. I think I'll probably be back for water, wastewater. But starting next week, we'll kick off the department process where the departments will review and submit their initial budget requests. And then last few weeks of March into April, we'll have the internal meetings with all our departments, review their budgets, go back and forth on a lot of things, adjust as needed, plan for how we're gonna deal with some of the anticipated service cuts to meet, make sure our revenues meet our expenditures, and go through that process. And throughout that whole timeline, the administration will continue to refine, those budgets, prepare the budget documents, and then the proposed date to submit the budget to the council, from my perspective, would be May 5th. This is the first full council meeting in May. So just to align with your timeline, I think it makes the most sense. I will also actually, as is tradition now, I'll be out on military leave for a couple weeks in April, so that puts a little wrinkle into things. So the National Guard will take me away again during budget season, but so that's kind of why the 5-5 is proposed rather than April 28th, it's just a timing issue. But then what that does leave is June 19th would ultimately be the 45-day cutoff for the council to adopt a budget, or it de facto adopts as is. So one of the things that the council needs to be aware of is, if you don't act on the budget by 45 days, the budget passes without, that is an action. That inaction creates an action which actually adopts the budget by default. So we've tried to be very upfront with that the last few years. I know there's been some historical drama around that. We're not trying to, make any surprises here. So that I put an asterisk there just because that is a holiday. So we're gonna reach out to the state to see if that would change it to actually the 20th, or if it would have to be a day earlier. We're gonna check in on that and get back to you. But that would just be sort of based on the 5-5 date, that would be the cutoff. And I think with that, based on your council calendar, June 16th would probably be the ideal day to vote the budget. That is a full council meeting. So rather than have to do some additional special meetings, but ultimately that's your prerogative. That's entirely up to you. But just, when we looked at the calendar, that seems to be the way that things line up the best. And then during that time between May 5th to whenever the council adopts the budget, traditionally, the finance committee has done the department level meetings, and I've been down here pretty much feels like every night for a few weeks. So I think, Chair DeLisio will probably have a plan for that, and we'll work off that. And that's kind of what we're looking at here. But I wanted to put this up there in case there was immediate concerns from the council perspective on these dates, and if we needed to sort of adjust fire here and come up with a different plan. But I just wanted to, this is really what we're thinking internally.
So Mason, thank you for this. This is a lot of information. It's a lot to think about. Thank you for working in the 45th day, living through that. Never want to do that again. Right? It could have been disastrous. Luckily, we were able to remediate it. But do we have any questions for Mason while we're here? Because I know this was a lot. President Cobus.
Yes, I have a question. We're talking a lot about Chapter 70. Wasn't the Student Opportunity Act supposed to help us and sort of help fix Chapter 70? And why didn't that help Attleboro?
Yeah, so to be clear, it did. So this is the last year of the Student Opportunity Act, which I think we're kind of seeing the tail end of it already. If you look at our net state aid, this is largely driven by the Student Opportunity Act. So we had, as sort of planned, we had sort of 5 years of significant revenue growth in Chapter 70. What that did is it raised the per pupil expenditure in Attleboro, I think, significantly. I think we're no longer in the bottom 10 in the state. So we benefited from that, but we weren't one of, honestly, a lot of the SOA money went to 10 communities, was kind of the primary benefactors of that. And I know everyone says this, but we kind of in some ways fall in the middle on a lot of things. So we didn't get the primary benefit, but we did benefit from it. But at the same time, there's just, I think, fundamental flaws in the formula that the Student Opportunity Act didn't address. And if anything, it kind of exacerbated it because, before the Student Opportunity Act, we were kind of right at the state's target share. And then as they funded the Student Opportunity Act, we kind of got further from that target share, which started to assign that additional percentage in excess of our revenue growth. And now we're kind of right on the border where we're about to tip into that next threshold where they might start applying 2%. instead of 1%. So that's another $500,000 that, you know, we have to find. So we are kind of on the threshold there, so that's a concern. But, you know, just the way the SOA functioned, it largely went to a very small sector of communities. We did benefit. There was other communities that didn't benefit at all. But I think there's still fundamental flaws in, you know, in the formula itself. And in some ways it's difficult because they're looking for an efficient and what they might call like a fair process. But, you know, what happens is like, if you're a community that can really afford to provide, you know, a certain level, if they have a target, you know, and you far exceed that target in what you're actually contributing, they still give you a minimum aid. So even if the formula says that they don't need any aid, they still get, you know, it's like 17.5%. Like no one has to contribute more than 87.5%, which is obviously, you know, they're playing a different game than we are, right? We're at that, we have to contribute, you know, 45%. So they're in a whole different world than us, but I think ultimately we weren't one of those major communities that benefit from it. We kind of fell in between.
Got it.
What's up?
Good.
Additional questions? If while you're reviewing this stuff and questions come up, please send an email, because I think I've been taking notes. I think there's a few areas where we can kind of come up with a little bit of a fact sheet, which will make this all a little more easier to digest, because it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot. So, all right, Mason, do you mind, are you able to hang out while we talk about the resolution?
Sure. Yeah.
Just-
I can be here to answer any questions.
All right, perfect. So, that being said, from the docket of February 17th, 2026, I entertain a motion to approve a joint resolution from the Mayor of Attleboro to the Attleboro Municipal Council and the Attleboro School Committee encouraging the Commonwealth to take specific targeted actions within fiscal '27 state budget to help address Attleboro's immediate school funding needs to maintain level services. This resolution will also reiterate how the Chapter 70 formula remains flawed, creating structural budget issues for the city.
Second.
Thank you. Motion is in order. Before I read this, I would like to actually recognize President Kobus, see if you had any comments about this.
I do. And so we distributed copies of the draft resolution, and I want to stress that this is a draft, and if anything, we can maybe read it next week before full council. My encouragement is that we vote this out tonight and then vote it before the full council next week, because it is timely to get it to the state delegation so that they can try to do something with it in time to actually affect the fiscal year 27 budget. And then I can, if you want, I can talk briefly about the 5 different items that I added on here. But this isn't my area of expertise, so I'd love for feedback, and we're still waiting for Representative Hawkins to provide sort of the big item that we should ask for. And my understanding is it was a decrease in enrollment statewide that's affecting a lot of communities, and so he's looking for something to talk to along those lines and to come from a number of different communities and to use similar languages. So that first one is still missing, and we're waiting for Representative Hawkins. The second one on there is talking about exactly what Mason said, is the transportation piece. And we referenced a House bill that Representative Hawkins has before the state right now. And then the next item was talking a little bit about Chapter 70 inflation. And then there's the Whole Child Grant Program, and just talking about supporting that, which would allow for grant money for nurses and counselors and social workers as an option to try to find something outside of the Chapter 70 path. And then supporting the student education circuit breaker which is often only supported up to like 75%, to try to help with, if we have somebody come into the district that normally catches us off guard. So that wouldn't necessarily help us immediately, but it would help us in the case where we have somebody move to the district, and we had not planned for that. And then the last item would be to sort of look at Chapter 70 assumptions, and some of those assumptions are inflation, healthcare, special education, transportation, and the local contribution. But specifically, the healthcare assumption tends to be based on a rolling average and may not actually account for, the huge increases we've seen over this year and last year. And like I said, this isn't my area of expertise, but I don't know if we can revisit some of those assumptions. But I feel like it would be incredibly challenging to reopen Chapter 70 this year. So, like Mason said, I think the transportation piece is the big piece, and maybe what Rep. Hawkins sends us. That concludes my comments.
What I would like to do, especially from a housekeeping perspective, which will keep this cleaner, is read it into the record tonight.
Okay.
And then if there are any amendments, we just amend that as opposed to, I just think it'll make it cleaner. Council Holmes?
Oh, thank you. I really think we need to connect with other communities that are struggling with this and see if they also, just to let them know this is what we're doing, maybe start something. I think that the only way we have to make waves, and we have to let the state know that this is really problematic. And like Mason said, there's some communities that are really well off and they don't even bother with this. And then there's others that really are struggling and they get a lot of aid. And then we're in this area where, so I don't know if there's other similar communities where we can kind of reach out to and just even make sure that we get it to them. And if they want to copy it and also kind of be connected to this, I think it would be helpful to do that. So I love this, and thank you so much for bringing this up.
Yeah, so, Council Holmes, I think that's an important point, because as much as this is about where we're at current state, this has to start the conversation. It's gotta be a bigger conversation. I think this is gonna be a situation where we're Attleboro, right? We're one community out of 351, I think, right? Gotta have a bigger conversation. This is really too important, and there's too many things that Mason's just kind of crossing his fingers, like, I hope this comes in, or I hope this comes in. The net school spending and the transportation costs have been a moving target for years, and one thing I want to say, when you looked at the historical pieces of it, remember, when you're looking at fiscal 20, 21, 22, those were COVID years. There wasn't a lot of transportation because it was, remote learning. Vice President Dolan.
Thank you. And to parlay on what Council Holmes said, that's exactly what they said when we had the joint meeting with the school committee. We talked about what we can do to implore the state to do something, and they basically said, superintendent said, other communities have to suffer, so we have to bring them forward. So the more communities that suffer, the louder our voices will be. But I don't think we can wait for that.
No, I think we have to take step one, and this has to be step one of a larger plan. I think the timing's interesting, just given it is an election year at the state with the gubernatorial election, state reps, state senators all up for re-election. So, could be an interesting time. But I think, we can't just sit back and say, and I'm not saying or asserting that this is what we've done, but saying, it's just Chapter 70. It's we've got to try to control the pieces of this that we can control. It's too important not to. Additional questions?
The one thing that I will add, and I very much agree that the more we can speak with one voice with other communities, the better. And that is one of the pieces that Representative Hawkins is trying to do, is to try to get some sort of a consistent message to insert in here. So this is, I stand by, this is very much a draft, and I expect it to change potentially significantly next week, but I'm happy to read it in.
Yeah, I just think that it'd be easy to amend it, then vote out something, and then it's totally different. So I think that's, from a housekeeping standpoint, that's the cleanest way. I think also, Rep. Hawkins, he only has one community. Rep. Scanlon has multiple communities, Senator Feeney has multiple communities. So there's an opportunity to really show that, there is solidarity, and it's not just, school committee versus council versus administration. This is an important first step, and what comes of it, we'll see what happens. But at least we know that Attleboro was saying, this is where we're at, This is what's important. This is how we can take the first of many important steps. Additional questions? So allow me to read this, bear with me. Joint resolution of the Mayor, Municipal Council, and School Committee of Attleboro regarding fiscal '27 state budget actions to maintain level services in Attleboro Public Schools and to advance long-term Chapter 70 reform. Whereas the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has a constitutional duty to provide all students an education, and the modern school finance framework established in 1993 was intended to provide a foundation level of spending that ensures educational equity. Whereas the Student Opportunity Act, SOA, represents a landmark commitment to closing achievement gaps, yet fiscal '27, widely recognized as the final year of full SOA implementation, finds many districts at a fiscal cliff due to structural flaws and unforeseen economic pressures. Whereas municipal and school leaders across the Commonwealth have identified a school funding crisis driven by the quote-unquote inflation glitch, where statutory limits and budget set inflation assumptions fail to match actual inflation, which exceeded 7% during the fiscal '22 to fiscal '24 period, permanently eroding the real dollar value of state aid. Whereas Attleboro sits in a quote-unquote funding desert, characterized by a low per-pupil expenditure of $18,487 fiscal '24, which is more than 4,600 below the statewide average, and an actual net school spending level that is only 104% of the state mandated minimum, placing the city in the bottom 10 of all Massachusetts municipalities. Whereas Attleboro's fiscal capacity is further strained by the absence of state reimbursement for regular day and in-district special education transportation, an unfunded mandate that has not been funded for over 2 decades, forcing the city to redirect institutional funds to pay for state and federal transportation requirements. Whereas the governor's fiscal '27 House 2 budget proposes a minimum per pupil aid growth level of $75 in fiscal '27, down from $150 in fiscal '26, highlighting broader concerns regarding the adequacy and stability of Chapter 70 growth assumptions. Now, therefore, it be resolved by the Mayor of Attleboro, the Attleboro Municipal Council, and the Attleboro School Committee, acting jointly, that the City of Attleboro respectfully urges the Commonwealth to take the following specific targeted actions in the fiscal '27 state budget related legislation. One is a placeholder for Rep. Hawkins, and I'll just say quick, I think that doing it this way, Todd, will be able to just amend that and put in whatever he puts.
Perfect.
Makes it easier. 2, fund in district transportation reimbursement, House 597, Senate 348. Include appropriations and implementing language to fund fiscal '27 tier of the in-district transportation reimbursement schedule, providing at least 50% reimbursement for regular day and in-district special education transportation costs. 3, correct the Chapter 70 inflation adjustment, H.678, S.388. Advance and include the technical fix to the Chapter 70 inflation adjustment mechanism to prevent the permanent erosion of real dollar education funding caused by inflation assumptions that lagged actual cost growth during the fiscal '22 through fiscal '24 period, and whose effects continue to compound, ensuring that Chapter 70 aid grows from a more accurate cost base on a prospective basis. 4, establish the whole child grant program. House 544, Senate 369, create and fund a formula-based grant to provide per pupil funding for school counselors, social workers, and mental health supports, prioritizing districts like Attleboro that were not major beneficiaries of the Student Opportunity Act. Stabilize the special education circuit breaker, fund the special education circuit breaker account 7061-0012 at a level that avoids proration and include all eligible transportation costs in the reimbursement calculation, while moving toward higher and more predictable reimbursement rates, including the 90% level proposed in House 691. Targeted Chapter 70 stabilization and a parameter collection in lieu of broad increases to the statewide minimum aid, currently down from $150 per pupil in fiscal '26 to $75 per pupil in fiscal '27, and recognizing the current fiscal '27 projections for districts such as Attleboro are driven by formula assumptions rather than minimum aid. establish a targeted fiscal 27 stabilization aid mechanism, and make focused adjustments to Chapter 70 costs and growth parameters during this final year of SOA implementation to protect districts that are materially below statewide per pupil spending levels and operate close to net school spending requirements from year-over-year aid volatility. Be it further resolved, this joint resolution reaffirms Attleboro's previously communicated request that the Commonwealth modernize and correct structural flaws in the Chapter 70 formula so that adequacy and equity are achieved not only for high poverty districts, but also for quote-unquote missing middle communities. Be it further resolved that the city clerk is hereby directed to transmit copies of this joint resolution to the governor, the Speaker of the House, the Senate President, the chairs of the House and Senate Committee on Ways and Means, chairs of the Joint Committee on Education, and the local state delegation. Adopted blank. We don't need that. But it's now officially got into the record. So it'll make it easier for next week. Anything you want to add, Mason, while you're here on this?
Yeah, I would just say briefly, like, we might need to think about, are we focusing on the formula, or are we focusing on some of the items outside the formula? With it being the last year of Student Opportunity Act, I don't know if, they're not gonna do anything with the formula right now to address July 1, right? I think it's important for like the next year and thinking about what happens next after SOA. So I just think the city we probably need to determine, are we focused on like the costs they can control immediately, or do we want them to open up the entire formula? And maybe those are two different asks. If they're in the same thing, I think that's fine. If we are focusing on the formula, I would probably have additional recommendations that I'd be willing to submit and include in there. I just don't know if that was the goal of the school committee, council, and administration or not. I feel like Rep. Hawkins maybe said, don't do that. I don't, but yeah.
I can add to that, and I think the goal for this should be for us to focus on what we can do for fiscal year 27 and provide sort of a targeted message, and if that means cutting some of these specific things to make the message more targeted, I think that makes sense. And one of the things in talking to Representative Hawkins this morning, we were talking about the inflation piece, and he was concerned about including that, in that it might water down this message because it was asked for last year and the state denied it and just flat out gave us a hard no on it. So coming back and asking for that again might not be an effective approach. So I do think there might be some work to target this, but I think the intention should be to look at what we can do for fiscal year 27 while continuing to highlight the issues and the overall Chapter 70. But I wouldn't expect the state to reopen that formula this year.
Yeah, I mean, just from my experience working in the legislature, like, it won't be possible. So some of the things some of the legislators could potentially propose is, the circuit breaker, funding that at the full level, which I believe is 75%. I think the budget may have been around 60%. So there's some capacity there that wouldn't necessarily open the formula and would provide some immediate financial relief to Attleboro, but a number of communities. But in terms of the formula itself, like, it's a way bigger task. I think SOA took them a decade. So yeah, I do think some of those changes need to be made, but I don't know if this is the vehicle for that.
No, I from my perspective, I think it's important that we're at least getting something documented of where we are and where we want to go. For too long, I've been on councils where it's just been, well, it's Chapter 70, and we've partnered with school committees where there's like, well, it's nothing we can do. Well, that's not good enough anymore. When you look, to me, when you go down from the 150 to 75 per pupil, I mean, who here can take a 50% haircut? No one. So, I mean, to me, that's scary. And we're not in a situation where our financial picture at a state level is going to get better in fiscal 28. So I think we have to start this conversation now. Additional comments on this? Okay. We'll move to a vote. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Mason. From the docket of February 17th, 2026, I entertain a motion to transfer $2,000 from account 11241-000-578300, citywide reserve fund for transfer to account 12401-000-511. 100, protective inspection, salary and wages part-time, to fill a temporary part-time clerical position to cover the office until staff returns in the building department.
Second.
Thank you. Motion is in order. Yeah, so this is essentially, it's to fund a 20-hour-a-week position for 4 weeks until the inspection office gets some staffing back, just to provide some relief. Any questions, concerns? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. From the docket of February 17th, 2026, I entertain a motion to approve expenditures of no more than $800,000 from the Special Education Stabilization Fund 8507 for unexpected special education transportation costs incurred during the current fiscal year.
Second.
Thank you. Motion is in order. So as Mason said, we're at about a little over the halfway mark in the fiscal year. District continues to see higher than normal and anticipated costs due to increased number of students with specialized transportation needs. So again, and we'll call this the Frank Cook quote, this is an unfunded mandate. Former President Cook talked about the unfunded mandates. We see it more with the school at Fields than anywhere else. We're required to care for, and this impacts both students inside and outside of the district. So this is a moving target each year, but in order to be able to support these encumbrances, the ask is for us to increase the expenditure limit from $400,000 to $800,000. And with any stabilization account, and we'll talk about this more throughout the budget process, but with the stabilization account, there are only specified expenditures that can be used with the stabilization account, so it's not like we're giving them a free, an open checkbook and just doubling it. There's very specific expenditures that can come out of a stabilization fund. Questions, comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed, motion passes. That's all the business for finance, and I'd call for an adjournment 8:21.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, we're adjourned at 8:21.
You wanna go to traffic?
I call the Traffic and Transportation Committee to order at 8:21. Members of this committee include myself, Councilors Morrissey and Councilor Delicio. Tonight we have two pieces of business. First, from the docket of December 16th, 2025. I would entertain a motion to approve the request to change ordinance S10-4 traffic control to reflect the following. S10-4.11 isolated stop signs. To delete eastbound drivers on Steer Street at Pike Avenue and insert northbound drivers on Birch and Cherry.
Second.
Thank you. So we have the deletion of Steer Street is simply because we are moving that from a single stop sign to a group of 3, which is coming up next, the multi-way. So we won't need this, this will become, we won't need it anymore. And the insert is a different issue, but it's in here. To insert northbound drivers on Birch at Cherry, because right now there is no stop sign at the bottom of the hill at Birch, and they go right across Cherry without stopping. I've seen it happen. And that will actually protect the people on Cherry. Are there any questions, comments, concerns? No? Hearing none, I think we can vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
And I say aye. The vote is 3-0. Okay. Moving along. From the docket of December 16th, 2025. We have I entertain a motion to approve the request to change ordinance S.10-4 traffic control to reflect the following. S.10-4.12 multi-way stop signs, insert Steer Street and Pike Avenue.
Second.
Thank you. This is the crux of what we were trying to do out in that area. There are actually 3 signs, and that is why it is called multi-way. Because the stop sign at the end of Steer Street will work with the 2 stop signs on each side of Steer Street that are located on Pike Avenue. Are there any questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none, I think we can vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
And I vote aye. Vote passes 3-0. And that concludes the business for the Traffic and Transportation Committee. I move to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And we are adjourned at 8:25.
The Zoning and Land Use and Sustainability Committee is canceled for tonight.
IT and Infrastructure Committee is canceled for tonight.
Public Safety and Emergency Management Committee called to order at 8:25. Myself and Councilor Angelo, I have 3 motions this evening. From the docket of February 17th, 2026, I entertain a motion to transfer $50,000 from account Citywide Reserve Fund for transfer to account Fire Overtime to cover the overtime costs for the Fire Department Apparatus Maintenance Officer.
Second.
Thank you. I think we heard from Mason this evening that there was gonna be a couple things coming up, or that we've already voted on, actually, that have to do with, public safety, but this is one of them. So from the note, it says, because the apparatus maintenance and repairs are not included in the development of the fire department budget, an operational overtime deficit is created each year. So that's what this is about. Any other comments or questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. From the docket of February 17th, 2026, I entertain a motion to appropriate $25,000 from account undesignated fund balance free cash general government to account fire dispatch overtime for the overtime funds to fill dispatcher vacancies for the remainder of fiscal year 26.
Second.
Thank you. All right, there was a request for $200,000 for fiscal year 26, and the city actually, we decided to reduce it to $175,000. And now they are needing the additional funds because of that. So this is just what it is. Any other comments or questions? For fiscal year 24, it was about $185,000, and then for fiscal year 25, it was $188,000. So this would make it, they were asking for $200,000, and we reduced it to $175,000, and it's not making it, so it's seeming like it does, they do need to require the funds. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. From the docket of February 17th, 2026, I entertain a motion for $16,700 from account Citywide Reserve Fund for transfer to the following accounts. $7,700 to account fire heating and $9,000 to account fire lights and power for funds for heating and electricity for the remainder of fiscal year 26 for the fire department.
Second.
Thank you. The cold weather, I think we've all kind of experienced the increased heating costs for our own personal homes, and that's just what's happening here. So any other comments or questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. That's all the business this evening. I'll call for an adjournment.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned at 8:28. Thank you.
I'll call Public Works Committee to order at 8:28. I have 2 motions this evening. From the docket of February 17th, 2026, I entertain a motion to transfer $331.54 from account 600057800 wastewater enterprise fund reserve fund for transfer to account 600057820 wastewater enterprise fund bill from previous years to pay additional charges from Badger meter that were not included in the fiscal year 22 encumbered purchase order.
Second.
Thank you. So this and the following one are both, we do the meter replacement it's ongoing, almost done. These are older bills that didn't get paid on time. So that's what we're looking at. Does anybody have any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion passes. From the docket of February 17th, 2026, I entertain a motion to transfer $497.30 from account 6100-578-300 Water Enterprise Fund Reserve Fund for transfer to account 6100-578-020 Water Enterprise Fund. Bills from previous years to pay additional charges from Badger Meter that were not included in the fiscal year 22 encumbered purchase.
Second.
Second. Same as above. Does anybody have any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion passes. I'd like to call for an adjournment at 8:30.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, we're adjourned. Thank you.
City property reclaims is canceled.
I call the License Committee to order at 8:30. Members of this committee include myself, Councilor Waterman, and Councilor Holmes. Tonight we have one piece of business. From the docket of December 2nd, 2025, I entertain a motion to approve the license application to host auctions from Deborah Carroll, doing business as Bam Smash Corp. Ltd., 129 Bank Street, to have monthly public auctions with a licensed auctioneer.
Second.
Motion is in order. I guess this fell off the docket for some reason, but there was a public hearing back on December 16th. No one showed up to speak for or against. I called Deborah today just to clarify and let her know, the time delay. And basically, it's just to clear out inventory. She said maybe once a month, it might not even be monthly, but they do have their own licensed auctioneer that they will be using, but she just wanted a license for the physical space itself. Anyone else have any questions or comments?
No.
Okay, hearing none, we can vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Motion passes 3-0. That concludes the business for the licensing committee. I move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned at 8:32.
Call ordinances, elections, and legislative matters to order at 8:32. Members of my committee include myself, Councilor Holmes, and Councilor McIntyre. From the docket of February 17th, 2026, I entertain a motion to call for a public hearing on March 3rd, 2026, to establish a joint ad hoc charter study committee with the objective of making municipal government more transparent, effective, efficient, and responsive to the current and future needs of our growing community.
Second.
Thank you. The motion is in order. So we all saw the communication that came down from the mayor, and she wrote a pretty detailed memo here regarding the request for a charter study committee, which is helpful. So I'd encourage everyone to take a minute and read that. It explains the difference between a charter commission and a charter study committee, which is very different. And I think it would be prudent to call for a public hearing so that folks who have been thinking about this in the context of a charter commission would have the ability to come down to the council and give their perspective. And also give the mayor an opportunity at the same time. I was going to invite the mayor to come to a committee meeting, but I think this could serve the same purpose with the public to explain the efficiency with a charter study committee. It's something that I've been researching a lot the last couple months, and I've had conversations with the mayor about, and I think this could provide a very valuable approach that's different from a charter commission, which is a very, very arduous process. But still get similar results by still having the same checks and balances that I think come with a charter commission. So that's my thought, is to call for a public hearing. I think that's the prudent thing to do and take the feedback from that. before we move forward with engaging any third parties, which that's also part of the ask too, to engage with the UMass Collins Center to help us along that process, to help establish that committee and be able to operate it, because this will be a long process. Any questions, comments, concerns? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. From the docket of November 18, 2025, I entertain a motion to amend the revised ordinances of the City of Attleboro by amending Chapter 5, Finance, to include the following new section. I'll actually just read the whole proposed ordinance, so it's read into committee here. 5-12 Tax Title Payment Agreements. This is going to be long. 5-12.1 Authorization. Pursuant to Chapter 60, Section 62A of the Massachusetts General Laws and the terms set forth in this section, the city treasurer is hereby authorized but not required to offer tax title payment agreements to persons entitled to redeem parcels and tax title. Nothing in this ordinance shall preempt or preclude the authority of the city treasurer to accept partial payments or to negotiate and enter into payment agreements authorized by the provisions of Chapter 60, Sections 22 and 22A of the Massachusetts General Laws or any other statutory authority. 5-12.2 Subject properties. Property which may be the subject of tax title payment agreements pursuant to this article must be a site or portion of a site from or at which there has been a release of oil or hazardous material, or which formerly operated as a dump or landfill, and B, zoned for commercial or industrial use. 5-12.3 Payment agreements. A, the city treasurer is hereby authorized to negotiate agreements for the reduction of interest that is accrued on the amount of the tax title account, hereinafter payment agreements with owners of eligible properties, the terms of which payment agreements shall not exceed $500,000 without approval from the municipal council. No tax principal or collection costs or fees may be waived pursuant to the terms of any such agreement. B, payment agreements may allow for the reduction of up to 25% of the interest that has accrued on the tax title account. C, such payment agreements shall be for a term of 5 years and require a minimum payment at the inception of the agreement of 10% of the total amount needed to redeem the parcel. D, during the term of the payment agreement, the city treasurer may not bring an action to foreclose the tax title unless payments are not made in accordance with the schedule set out in the payment term, or timely payments are not made on other amounts due to the city that are a lien on the same parcel. E, such payment agreements shall not preempt or preclude the authority of the Attleboro Home Rule Charter or the revised ordinances for the city of Attleboro. F, payment agreements shall include without limitation: 1, the amount of outstanding real estate taxes; 2, the statutory interest to accrue; 3, the description of quantifiable monthly payments; 4, the inception date of monthly payments; 5, the date of the final payment; 6, contractual late fees to be imposed; 7, the amount and percentage of the reduction of interest that will occur provided that the recipient complies with all terms of the payment agreement; 8, a statement that any reduction in the interest authorized by this section shall be contingent upon the receipt, fulfillment of all terms of the payment agreement, including making all payments required by such payment agreement in a timely manner. 9, such payment agreement shall further provide that all interest and penalties will become due in full should the recipient fail to comply with all terms of the payment agreement. 10, any and all contractual terms as arranged between the city treasurer and the property owner, and if necessary, as approved by the mayor and the municipal council. 5-12.4, signing of payment agreements. All payment agreements shall be signed by the city treasurer and the property owner, whose signatures shall be notarized. 5-12.5, copies of payment agreements. Copies of all payment agreements shall be provided to the mayor, the city collector, the chief assessor, the city auditor, and the property owner. 5-12.13, this ordinance shall take effect upon passage.
Second.
Thank you. Motion is in order. Okay, so I trust most everyone remembers the public hearing on this, and hopefully some of the testimony that was given. So essentially boiled down, just to refresh everyone's memory, this particular ordinance is basically being born out of an option at the state level that allows us to adopt an ordinance to be able to negotiate through the city treasurer overdue tax bills, essentially, with property owners of very specific properties. Here, it's commercial, industrial properties that have had some issue of, hazardous material or oil, itless, properties that have been formerly operated as dumps or landfills, so that we as a city can collect some taxes on these properties that would otherwise be foreclosed upon. And while there might be value in some properties, these are very tricky ones. I know that from real estate experience as well, of hazardous waste and things like that. So while in some instances the prudent action is to foreclose on it as a city, number one, it's a very expensive proposition. Number two, that's a big liability for a city to take on, especially for a property with hazardous waste. And so, once you own it, you own the problems on that property as well. So, and in the meantime, we're not able to collect any property taxes on these properties. Meanwhile, the interest and fees are piling up on these properties. So this will allow the city treasurer to be able to negotiate payment agreements, which the city treasurer can do now, but right now there's no ability to be able to negotiate the interest, which can be a hefty amount for some properties where you've got years of unpaid taxes and this interest is accrued. So this is really just another tool in the toolbox. I know one of my initial questions and sort of concerns after looking at this versus the statute was, are we giving enough flexibility to the city treasurer based on what the statute allows? So a couple things that I wanted to point out is here in the proposed ordinance, it allows up to the reduction of up to 25% of the interest that's accrued on the tax title account. Now, the statute does allow for a much higher reduction. So that was one of my questions to Treasurer Gignac here, and I subsequently followed up with her and had conversations about some of these other questions that I had. And at the end of the day, this is the reduction that she felt was prudent to put in the ordinance. Is up to 25%. I mean, of course, as a city, that's another source of revenue, but I think in terms of being able to negotiate with property owners, I'd love to give as many resources as possible to the city to be able to negotiate and do that. She felt 25% was maybe the right number, and we can revisit that once we've had the opportunity to be able to implement this tool. I mean, there's a specific property with no fossil fuel now that could benefit from this ordinance, and so we'll see how that plays out, and maybe there are some other opportunities here that could be a win-win between the city and property owners. But that was one of the questions that I had, so I'm comfortable leaving it at 25%, knowing that this is something that could increase in the future. And the other thing is the term of the agreements is Treasurer Gignac was comfortable with up to 5 years, but the statute, I believe, allows for payment agreements up to 10 years in term. So those were the two main things. Otherwise, everything else seemed to be in line from my perspective. But yeah, with those comments, are there any comments, questions from council? All right, hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. And one more piece of business. Okay, from the docket of October 15, 2024, I entertain a motion to discharge the following: the introduction of a new committee, Section 2-22, Community Engagement Committee.
Second.
Thank you. Motion is in order. So following our discussion in full council meeting last week, I think it's prudent to move this piece of business to another committee. I think at this point, well, I know for sure my my position on this has been pretty clear, but hearing the will of the council and also taking into account the comments that were made, it sounds like there's still a lot of confusion around this proposed ordinance and what committee is actually being created, not only from the comments from the whole council, but also from comments from the public. I think emails that we've all received as counselors, and I think that's not good to have confusion. So I think if this can be narrowed down into some committee that the majority of the council will support, then I think that at a minimum needs to be done. And I think in terms of thinking about what this committee should do, how it should operate, I think that's probably best for the personnel committee. So I've talked to Councilor Angelo about moving this into his committee, which he's happy to take on. I think that would be best for the council as a whole. So that's what I'm suggesting here in our committee, that we discharge this and allow this to go into personnel. Councilor Angelo.
Thank you, Councilor Tavares. I just want to say thank you for doing this, and I give you a lot of credit for understanding the roadblocks and stuff that you've had to deal with, and everything that you had to put up with, over the years, as we talked about. But thank you for this, and I think it takes a big person to do that, and give you a lot of credit for that. So thank you.
Councilor Holmes.
Thank you. So I guess what is the process? So we would discharge from committee, full council discharge, and then do you know what the process is?
Yeah, essentially, yeah. So myself and President Kobus have been in contact with the city solicitor, but I'll let him give some comments.
Okay. Sorry.
Thank you, Councilor Tavares. And I'd like to echo Councilor Angelo's comments. I think this was a great idea, and I very much appreciate your suggestion to do this and moving forward. I think that's great. With regard to procedurally, the way we're looking at this is this would be a motion to discharge introduced from the committee. Provided this passed, it would then go before the full council. And in our rules and procedures, we have a rule that a motion to discharge requires a 2/3 vote of the full council. So then, after this motion to discharge comes out, we would vote on it next week. And provided it passes and it'll require a 2/3 vote, then we can assign it to the Personnel, Veterans, and Human Services Committee. And that would be my intent. And so, Councilor Tavares, thank you again. I think this is great. And that process has been, like I said, Councilor Tavares and I worked with the solicitor to make sure that is all above board.
One question. Thank you, Councilor Tavares. Before I'm procedurally, can it be handled where this goes back to the administration to be tweaked and reworked on with some input from some of the people that were here to speak, and we get a letter from Mr. Vivar as well, and Susan Williams and Tanya Oliveira to kind of let them have a little bit of a discussion on this too as well with the administration.
I'll give my opinion. My opinion is I don't think process-wise that's what should happen, because this particular piece of business was initiated by the council. The piece of business that originated from the administration was the Diversity Commission. Now, whether that's the same as this or not is still an open question. But technically speaking, this is a completely separate ordinance. So now I think collaboration can happen with the administration, but I don't know that this should be sent up to them. But of course, once, assuming our committee discharges it and President Kobus reassigns it to your committee, I assume that would be your prerogative at that point. So. Councilor Holmes.
Yes, I really appreciate your work on this too, Councilor Tavares. It has been very confusing, to say the least. So I think that you're being handed something that's a little bit of needs to be some clarity on what's going on, because even I felt like when we were having the discussion last week, members of the community didn't really understand procedurally what was kind of happening. It seems like there's a lot of just not clarity on what's happening. So I think it's a fresh set of eyes, breathing new life into this and kind of figuring this out. So I support the efforts to have it discharged. And that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Councilor Delcio?
This demonstrates great leadership. I think, Jonathan, someone could have just sat, you could have just sat on it. Could have just let it die in committee. I think it's impressive that you listened to the feedback from your peers and you're able to take some kind of action based on what was said here on the council floor, based on, like you said, emails, public feedback and sentiment. And to Council Holmes' point, there's so much ambiguity in the way this is. You know, it's probably more of a conversation for next week, but I would like to see this piece of business, the way it's written, compared to some of the other commissions and committees, so we can see where that overlap may or may not be. But thank you.
Councilor Wyman?
I think that you've demonstrated a very wise move. Of course, you're on the committee. If that happens, you'll still be involved. And I welcome that. I welcome that, because I want to continue to learn from you as well. So, thank you.
Any comments, questions, concerns? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. And with that, that concludes the business of ordinances, elections, and legislative matters. I call for adjournment at 8:50.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.